And we're starting to get some attendees to populate in here. Okay, very cool. All right. Good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending upon where you are. My name is Jim McCafferty. I'm an associate professor at Kennesaw State University. I'm also an executive board member for CrimCon. We'd like to welcome you to CrimCon 2020. This is the Friday session. We're on stream number 4. It's 2 p.m. and this is Body-Worn Cameras Part 2. The second panel, we just had another panel prior to this on body-worn cameras, and if you are watching us on video sometime in the future, you can go back and watch that first part as well. So we have 3 great presentations lined up for today. If you are an attendee and you have any questions, at the bottom of your screen, there is a little Q&A icon. Please type your questions in there, and we're going to hold questions till the very end. And hopefully we'll have some interaction between the audience and our panelists for that. But without further ado, I'd like to throw the floor to Julie and let her begin the presentation.
Great. Thank you, Jim. And good morning, afternoon, evening to those of you out there as well. My name's Julie Wartell, and today's hat that I'm wearing is with the San Diego County District Attorney's Office, where I serve as a crime analyst advisor. Some of you might have seen or listened to a couple of previous presentations by Karen Schmerler and Deborah Weisel about this same project on domestic violence and reducing repeat prosecutions. So my aspect that I'm going to talk about today is the use of body-worn camera, which was one of the aspects that of the overall domestic violence project. So when we started looking into prior research, and I know that there was a previous, as Jim mentioned, previous body-worn camera, most of the body-worn camera research that has been out there is around police. So very little on prosecution and courts, and I wasn't able to go to the previous session, but I understand there was an excellent presentation in Canada from University of Montreal about body-worn cameras in the courts. So it was a good segue into this one. The previous research in Phoenix that was done, they talked about how the use of body-worn camera in prosecution increased the conviction rate. The Los Angeles City Attorney's Office, Elizabeth Groff, including myself, we looked at the role of body-worn camera in the issuing decision for the city attorney. So in many big cities in the United States, the prosecutor, there is a second prosecutor, the city attorney, who prosecutes all of the misdemeanor or the more minor crimes. So unique in terms of that, also unique in that it's generally one police department that they're looking at. And I mention unique in one police department because that's one of our issues in San Diego County, is that we have 10 major police departments as well as a smattering of others that come into the district attorney's office. So we're a countywide prosecutor there. And then the other piece of research was a survey or interviews and focus groups done of 3 county district attorney's office throughout the country. And that included the North County branch that our focus was on as well as part of our grant. So just real quickly, based on the focus group information, essentially these were the themes that came out. That they were helpful if you had time to look for them. So a lack of time, definitely. If you have enough evidence, then you're not going to make the time or have the time. You don't need the body-worn camera necessarily. That they were most helpful when you're on the fence about should I prosecute or file charges, or am I going to reject this case for a variety of reasons. Also, that the victim statement was the most important aspect of the body-worn camera footage that the prosecutors were using. And then lastly, that often they will find if they have the time to look at the camera footage, that they will find additional information that may not have been included in the report. The focus of the rest of my presentation is on some quantitative data that we looked at based on, again, this uniquely that we have multiple law enforcement agencies and they're stored in multiple places, the body-worn camera data itself. So we did not look at the videos. We looked at what data is captured in the database based on each record. Two of our police departments in San Diego County, Escondido Police Department and Carlsbad, are in this North County branch. The North County, we have 4 branches, and then the Central Division in San Diego County. So we had 5 months of cases, and this is based on domestic violence cases that were submitted to our office by law enforcement. 305 domestic violence cases were submitted. Then we had this thousands of evidence.com records of the body-worn camera. One of the problems with the data was that it didn't say what agency or any address or anything about that in there. So the only thing that we could match or join on was the case number. Based on data entry issues, it wasn't pretty, but based on cleaning up quite a bit, I was able to match everything but 41 cases. So talk about that in a minute as well. But based on the results that we're going to see are for 264 cases. 2 cases, there were 2 defendants. And again, unable to determine which body-worn camera based on this database matched which defendant. So they were kind of merged together there. Those 41 cases, when they were looked into, there were, so that's 13% of the 305, that based on a lot of research and time, it was a very time-consuming effort. We had a paralegal help us on this, that 9% were believed to be mistagged. In other words, the wrong case number or some way of misidentifying, so unable to be matched in that regard. And then 4% were totally missing. Looking back at police reports and everything, no reason for figuring out why there wasn't a body-worn camera record in our evidence.com database. Overall, there were numerous videos per case, and they were quite lengthy. So on average, 4.6 videos per individual domestic violence arrest or case. And each body-worn camera video had 23.2 minutes of time. So if we think about that, it's approximately 1 3/4 hours of body-worn camera. And in many cases, that's just, there isn't that amount of time for the prosecutor to go through all of that to be able to say, is this going to be helpful or not? So as a result of that, videos were only viewed for 1/3 of the cases. So you can see here that 67% no videos were viewed. In 15% of the cases, at least one video was viewed. So when cases had multiple videos, and remember that we have 4.6 per case in many cases, that one of them were viewed. Unable to determine in the data why that particular one was chosen. In 18% of the cases, all videos were viewed, whether there was 1, 2, 5, 8, etc. So breaking it down by crime type as to figuring out, were they looking at particular cases more often than not? And we do see that 4 cases that the arrest and prosecution was for violating a court order, that most of the time it was not viewed. Builds up to the felony assault and battery, that 62% of the cases were not viewed, or conversely 38% were viewed. And then other types, as you'll probably all know, that domestic violence might be vandalism, it might be harassment, all of these other types of domestic violence related cases, they actually were viewed more often than when it was a straightforward assault or battery, whether it was a felony or misdemeanor. The next event, this was, you got to work with what data you have, and one of the fields that was available was what was the date that the last time the body-worn camera was viewed. So we were able to look at that with our cases to say, what was the next event that happened after that date where it was last viewed? And these are kind of in the order of the court case system. So initially is the arraignment, and So were cases being viewed last time before the first time the prosecutor is seeing the defendant? Very small amount of those. In other words, it wasn't making that final decision prior to the arraignment. The next step for a misdemeanor is the readiness hearing, and we can see that's where they go to the arraignment, they put in a plea of not guilty, and prosecutor says, okay, we're going to take this forward at going to the readiness hearing. That's when they're going to have more time before they can actually go into that next event. And you can see down the way, and that's where any cases that were filed or prosecuted, we're going to have this additional information. If it was rejected, we don't have any next events. That body-worn camera was not associated with reduced case age. Different findings than was found in Canada, but we see here just in terms of, again, viewed and not viewed, and not really much of a difference in terms of that reduction. And so just to wrap up, some lessons learned is that we definitely need more aggregate research and additional analysis. You're about to hear from Deborah Weisel on some of that additional analysis that was looked at, that it's a very time-consuming and resource-intensive use of body-worn camera in the prosecution process, and that we should not expect body-worn cameras will have a major impact on that ultimate impact or effect on prosecutions themselves. And my contact information, and look forward to some additional questions and discussions after the other sessions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. I appreciate it. That was great. Let's invite Deborah to take the floor then.
I thought you had me for last in the sequence today, but that's fine. I'm happy to go ahead.
You're listed second, but you know, if you and Nets and Martinez
okay.
want to, okay.
I'm happy to go right ahead now. So I just thought it was going to be last, but there you go. Can you guys see my PowerPoint now?
I can.
Great, super. Ready to rock and roll. So I don't have to introduce myself too much since Julie introduced me, but I am Deborah Lam Weistel from North Carolina State University. So we're on opposite coast today, west coast to east coast of the United States. We've been working on domestic violence for a while, and this dimension of looking at the impact of body-worn cameras on the prosecution of domestic violence is particularly intriguing in San Diego County because it's a very large county, and they also have a city prosecutor, so they share the same court management data system. We have different data from, we have the same data points for both prosecutors. This is actually, we can do a cross-sectional examination of the impact of body-worn camera based on different law enforcement agencies. Since body-worn cameras were adopted at different times by 10 different law enforcement agencies over time. So we're examining a data set that's longitudinal over from 2010 to 2019. And I'll present to you today basically annual data, but we have it on a weekly basis as well to distinguish between agencies. The overall long-term trend in domestic violence in San Diego County was predominantly on a downward slope to around 2010 or 11 and has been flat since then. These counts provided to show the overall volume of cases, and these are all domestic violence crimes and incident reports reported to law enforcement agencies based on state law. So not all of these reflect a case or crime submitted to the district attorney, but they show you the overall trend throughout the county, just as a big picture here. Now, what we saw was that cases are submitted, as Julie mentioned, to the DA predominantly by 10 separate law enforcement agencies spread across the county that are quite different size, ranging from San Diego Police Department, the largest, to the smallest, which is Coronado Police Department, my favorite, because it's a paradise there. But just to give you a visual of the county-wide view here, these 10 agencies have all adopted body-worn cameras, but they did so at different points in time. So as you look at the screen from left to right, the earliest adopter, and I included the number of sworn officers in the agency just to show the relative size comparison. Escondido was first in 2010, followed by Coronado. San Diego Police Department, the most sworn, over 2,000 in July 2014. And so on up until 2018 with La Mesa Police Department. So different size agencies, different crime pictures in their communities, and different adoption periods. So we can look at what impact these had on the prosecution of, but also the police submitting cases to the district attorney. One of the main things that we found initially was that number of cases submitted to the district attorney actually increased over time. Remember from the previous slide, starting about 2014, more agencies were adopting body-worn cameras, and we see an increase in the number of cases submitted to the district attorney. So workload is increasing for the district attorney to prosecute these cases. And if you look at what Julie said about reviewing the body-worn camera footage, obviously that has implications as well if they were to review the footage prior to deciding to prosecute the case. So that shows we have a change in police behavior, submitting more crimes before we even look at the prosecution of them. And an important trend we've identified is this also causes this difference in the type of case submitted to the district attorney. In this table, in the graph, I'm only looking at county district attorney, which handles felonies countywide, but only misdemeanors outside the city of San Diego. But we see there's a little change in here in terms of proportions, with sharper increases of felonies compared to misdemeanors. In the state of California, any domestic violence crime with a visible injury is considered a felony and typically booked as a felony crime. That's a lot different than in my state, like in North Carolina, where, you know, many more are misdemeanor crimes than felonies, but this is particular to California. And we see this difference. It's a similar proportion, but it does vary, and the trend varies. Starting about 2014 as body-worn cameras started to be adopted on a widespread basis. So the implications of that are critical because we might expect there to be changes in performance measures or impact measures related to body-worn camera adoption. Particularly if you look at these measures, think about this from the police point of view. We've seen the police are booking more cases as felonies and misdemeanors. And they're also, we calculated a harm index score for the offenses to calculate smaller variations in crime severity, booked or not. Really, a big part of the concern here is that cases with that might be booked as a felony, if there's any visible injury, it should show in a body-worn camera. On misdemeanor cases, there's no visible injury. It still might affect the prosecution of cases because the prosecutor is able to see victim and often offender demeanor, the setting and situations that are occurring. So we want to look at the percent of cases prosecuted in the county. Typically about a third of the cases in the county are prosecuted. The charge level, the mean offense crime level that is issued, percent cases convicted as felony, and sentence days, issue days, and case age. All different measures, some more important to the police, reflecting there, and the other reflecting performance measures of interest to the district attorney. Julie's talking about how many cases are reviewed the body-worn camera. If you're reviewing body-worn camera, it's taking you more time to spend on a case in terms of prosecuting it or potentially reviewing it to make an issue decision. We are looking at this overall as a longitudinal interrupted time series. But I'm just going to present to you today really more the differences in changes in means from before and after on these different measures. So in the first column, pre-body-worn camera, I have all the 10 agencies they have 40,000 cases submitted to the DA before they adopted body-worn cameras. They adopted at different times, so it's not a time period associated with us. And the post-body-worn camera, you see at the bottom, it's 27,710. So we have a substantial base to detect significance in, and honestly, all of these changes are at a statistically significant level. If you look at the beginning, we should change in the police officer behavior. We know the number of crimes is up, but they're submitting or booking 53% of offenses as felonies compared to 51% beforehand. The severity of the crime that they're booking at is increased from 777, this is basically based on sentence days eligible, to 814. The issue rate, remember the percent of cases to be prosecuted by the district attorney went up substantially from 33% to 37%. So definitely moving in the right direction on that. And the number of cases that were issued as felonies also increased 5% from 28% to 33%. Again, another, it might seem modest, but it's really substantial change. We are not seeing quite as large a change in percent convicted. This is percent convicted of those cases issued. 90% of the DA was already convicting at a high rate, but it still increased more to 93%. And those convicted as felony also increased from 25 to 28%. Now, you'll note here that the sentence days associated with those convictions actually decreased from a mean of 560 to 495. And the reason for that is because they're having more misdemeanors come into the system. So they're getting a shorter sentence period in terms of sentence days, even though more are being convicted here. Particularly for managing the issue decision time, there's a clock in terms of how long prosecutors have to just make a decision whether to prosecute or not in California, declined from 13 days to 10 days. So this really confirms what Julie was saying earlier, that prosecutors don't have the time to review cases prior to making an issue decision, but they're still having an impact there. So whether that's an impact on the defendant's decision to plead guilty earlier in the process, we can examine that. But importantly, we also see a decline in the case aids, the time from issued to disposed of, whether it's an arraignment or jury or any time along the path, decline from 85 days to 73 days. All of these differences are really significant, and they're also important to the district attorney's office and to the individual law enforcement agencies. Our more comprehensive analysis, we do see a lot of variations between agencies. Some police departments pre-screen their cases and don't submit them all to the district attorney for prosecution. Some submit everything. Some agencies appear to have a better quality of investigation in the report, but overall, the adoption of body-worn camera appears to be increasing the quality of cases and the evidence of cases, enabling the district attorney to prosecute those cases and to prosecute them successfully. So we're really encouraged by this. And again, we have much more analysis forthcoming, but a little bit too much to share in a little 10-minute time frame today. So you can feel free to contact me further for additional questions about this, but hopefully this will kind of whet your appetite to learn more about the overall implications of adopting body-worn camera.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Deborah. As we get our last presentation set up, I'd just like to remind the audience that there is the Q&A function on the bottom of your screen. and to please go ahead and use that. So without further ado, let's move on to our last presentation.
Thank you. So my name is Marthinus Koen. I'm an assistant professor of criminal justice at SUNY Oswego. And today I'm going to talk about project abandonment, or at least how police officers across an agency made sense of cameras from the time it was implemented until the department decided to go with a different manufacturer. And so in order to do this, I'm applying technological frames theory. Now, this theory looks at how relevant social groups, so people based on their position in a department or an organization and the nature of their interaction with the technology, make sense of a technology over time. And it also states that people can think and make sense of anything in different ways at the same time, meaning you can think about the technical aspects of a technology, why it was implemented, and its consequences of day-to-day use, all at the same time. So for this, I'm applying that theory to what I learned at the Pennybridge Police Department. So if it would just click, aha. Okay, so I'm using a pseudonym for Pennybridge, which is a mid-sized police agency in the Midwest. And it was about 300 officers or so. I'm also going to be using a pseudonym for the type of camera they used, predominantly because they were a beta agency for that manufacturer, meaning that whenever something broke, the manufacturer would replace it for free, and sometimes the manufacturer would use the camera being on the officers for like marketing material and whatnot. So there's just too much information out there that if I were to give you the actual name of the body camera manufacturer, that it would give away the identity of the agency, and then I'm not keeping my promises. So I'm referring to the body camera manufacturer here as ProCop. I know I'm not really that creative, and then also their back end storage system as ViewSafe. And so ProCop are the system, like the actual cameras, and then ViewSafe is the on-premises application they used for their server. So yes, they kept their they kept their footage on premises, meaning they dealt with their own storage as opposed to giving it to someone like evidence.com. And also these were body-mounted cameras, so they sat on the body. My research methods comprised semi-structured interviews with about 106 officers, a patrol division survey, and then some ride-along data. And data collection occurred in 2018, and it lasted about 8 months or so. And so while we were collecting this data, so we actually went in there not thinking that anything about project abandonment, but as we were collecting the data and we were having discussions with command staff, it turned out that they were in the process of abandoning their current program. So again, the technological frames theory says that based on your position in a department and the nature of your interaction with the technology, you're going to have similar views, or you're going to be in a position to make sense of a technology the same as others. And so what I ended up doing was I looked at each individual person's technological frame, and I mapped it out. And I realized that, yes, indeed, frames did coalesce around two relevant social groups that I'll refer to as administrators and users. Administrators were higher up in the agency and were more involved in policy creation and seldom interacted with body cameras or the footage, while users had more frequent interaction with the technology, both on the front and the back end, and they hold lower rank. So here you can see a nice little table that outlines my relevant social groups. So the way that I'm going to present my data is how each of the groups made sense of the technology in each of the three domains. So first, when it came to the implementation, at the time of implementation, administrators obviously wanted to get a technology that would be a gesture to the community of good faith. They wanted something that would hold officers accountable while also protecting them. So they wanted, the reason for implementing was to have a transparency tool. And then this view remained unchanged. This is the way they felt about the implementation the whole way through. Excuse me. Users, on the other hand, had a way different view of things. When they found out cameras were coming, they thought it was going to be a gotcha mechanism used for witch hunts. And excuse me. And this view actually went away after like a year or so, right? As they saw no one was actually getting in trouble. However, one event that I refer to as the needle event occurred that served as a flashpoint that immediately changed views. And so what happened was you had an officer, he got called to a run, they cuffed this person, they patted him down, and as they were patting him down, they were saying, hey, is there anything that's going to stick or stab me? Person said no. Bam, gets stabbed by a heroin needle, and the officer loses his cool, and he starts punching the person that was handcuffed, and the other 3 officers around get involved in this. And so this obviously resulted in a complaint, which then became a massive thing that blew up in the community. And so the footage was shared all over social media, and the administrators, as a result, quickly fired one of the officers, and the rest pretty much were put on desk duty, or they were severely disciplined. And so users saw this as the administrators selling them out. And they developed this very negative view. They said, yes, these things might have been implemented to protect us, but they were really just a gotcha mechanism. And right after that, the administrators implemented another policy called the run card policy, which supervisors on a monthly basis had to look at each individual officer's run card and then compare that to the amount of videos in their folder to make sure that they were actually turning on their camera. So these 2 things really shifted the way that officers felt about the implementation of the cameras. When it came to the day-to-day use, administrators, again, they wanted something, they thought this would be something that would increase transparency, and these views were reinforced. However, they also noticed that after the needle incident, that they can actually control the narrative by releasing footage to the public early. And so what they would do is whenever something happened that they thought might catch wind in the media, they would immediately release that video on Facebook or Instagram to get ahead of the narrative. So they would sometimes, and so I was there for several of those press releases, and so they would call the media in and say, hey, we're gonna have a Facebook Live thing here. They show the video, they explain what happened, and they felt that helped them control the narrative of big events. Users saw it differently. They thought this was going to be a witch hunt mechanism, and then and while they were honest about the fact that yes, there's evidentiary value. Like it helps me get convictions in court. It helps get me off frivolous complaints. It ends those complaints. It closes the complaints faster. However, there were major adverse impacts on their discretion that they very much lamented. For instance, outside of body cameras, the chief just at some point in time implemented what was known as a misdemeanor writ policy, meaning that if you're an officer, you find someone in the street, you run their background, they have an open misdemeanor, you have to arrest them then and there and take them to jail. Before that, officers would use that information in order to gain leverage, sometimes to gain information or to get a citizen to comply. And so this really impacted their discretion, and they felt like they had no more room to make decisions, because with felonies, you already have less discretion. As a result, they felt like they didn't want to police as much, and so they began to depolice. They were more concerned. They felt like they were becoming more concerned about ending up on YouTube or being displayed in the media, and so they wanted to avoid as much as possible, and so they became way less proactive. So as a result, officers started developing this view that they're only going to use the technology in accordance with policy. When it came to the features and functionality, administrators, when they were evaluating products, they were very much concerned that they were going to get something that was not going to be worth their money, right? And so when ProCop came to them and said, "Hey, we'll make you a beta agency," they felt like it was an offer that they could not refuse. It was the cheapest option. However, over time, as they were realizing, well, this beta period is at some point going to come to an end, actually in about 3 years, And they were realizing there were so many issues like poor battery life, distorted images, view safe was malfunctioning, and the storage costs were just becoming more and more of a burden. They felt that, you know what, our worst fears were realized. We did not implement a valuable product. And so they said, maybe it's time to start looking for something else. Users, on the other hand, did not really care about that so much. They focused more on, are we going to have to use a technology that's going to be easy to use, right? Is it going to be something that I'm going to be fumbling with in the field and worrying, and putting my safety, at risk? And so they learned that pretty quickly after implementation that ProCop and ViewSafe were, in essence, easy to use. They were simple to understand. However, there were so many technical shortcomings that it actually made it frustrating, like battery life dying, cameras losing focus, wire snapping, alligator clips falling off. The slowness of the server was extremely frustrating for many officers who wanted to sometimes review their footage to write a report, or maybe it was a supervisor who wanted to review someone else's use of force. And one major issue was that if you started playing a video and you wanted to skip through it, like we all do on like YouTube or whatever, it would, the second you skip to another part of the video, it would start back over. The problem is, since the policy mandated you turn on the camera when you're dispatched, oftentimes there's like 5 to 10 minutes of just steering wheel. And so supervisors or anyone wanted to get past that. And so when they would do that, it would just start the whole thing over. And so as a result, again, users had this view of, this is a technology that's a gotcha mechanism that limits my discretion, and I hate using it because it's technically inferior. And so that enforced that view that they're only going to use this thing to the point that policy mandates it. So what can we learn about this? Well, the cheapest option isn't always the most valuable, right? The cheapest option can sometimes cause financial, logistical, and organizational issues. The problem at Penny Bridge is that the amount of buy-in that they're going to have to generate now for the next batch of body cameras for the next product is going to be so much more than it was at the beginning, because of the amount of negative frames that resulted because of the ProCop option that they chose. Moreover, when you make policies, and the way you enforce them is important, because the Penny Bridge command staff didn't intend for body cameras to over-empower this misdemeanor policy, right? And then also the way that you use body cameras to enforce your policy, you use the footage to enforce your policy, can have flashpoint impacts on the way the rest of the department views the technology, which can be good or bad, like in the case of Penny Bridge. Anyways, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you to all of our panelists. Excuse me. There is one question in the Q&A box, and I can ask it to the panel and I'll let you pick who answers this here. This is from John. He writes, in some jurisdictions, including those in Virginia, prosecutors' office are demanding more resources to view the tsunami of digital media evidence that they are getting from body-worn cameras. Is that a problem in San Diego? How did individual prosecutors decide how much video to watch? Did they defer to law enforcement to tell them what portion of the film were relevant?
Deb, you want me to give that to you? No, I'm just kidding. John's supposed to throw us a softball, not a hard question. The short answer is no, 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 and no. There have not been any more resources related to body-worn camera and video evidence. We have in San Diego County DA's office I forget what their trial support services that do, like they do a lot of the graphics and stuff for trials. But in terms of reviewing evidence, no. In LA at the city attorney's office, they actually used our research to get more resources. Our research plus the fact that the city had spent millions and millions of dollars on LAPD and getting them cameras, and that increased, tenfold the amount of work. So the LA City Attorney's Office got funded for 7 paralegals and 7 prosecutors just to deal with digital evidence. In answer to do the prosecutors, are they told where that it is? That's on a case-by-case basis. It might be in the report that they say, oh, the victim statement said this. They may or may not even put in the report that there's body-worn camera evidence. So from what we were able to look at and from the focus groups, it's really on a sometimes yes, sometimes no. There's no standard or policy for that. Again, referring to the LA research, they were working, it's a lot easier to work with one department, although LAPD being giant, of instituting that as well, where there was some marking of, check out 7 minutes in and a way to do that. Deborah also had some experience with Chula Vista Police Department on a previous project and might be able to answer that in terms of the check.
Well, I just, to reinforce Julie said earlier, and we did a focus group earlier with district attorneys that in San Diego County, they aren't looking at and reviewing the body-worn camera unless they can't decide whether to prosecute or not. So it's a smaller group. And my interpretation of the increased prosecutions and conviction rates is that body-worn camera has actually improved the quality of the initial police investigation of the cases being submitted to the district attorney. The case age to make a decision is shortened, and I don't see any other plausible reason for that other than the adoption of body-worn cameras. So what I believe is that the case quality overall has improved. So, if you're not looking at everyone, we have heard some agencies look at every body-worn camera video, but that just seems, a little bit excessive. Especially if you have 7,000 to 8,000 domestic violence cases a year. I don't know how you could possibly do that.
Okay, thank you. There is another question here from Jessica. When agencies did view the video for IPV prosecution, what did they mention, if anything, that was the most helpful for them to utilize in the prosecution?
Deb?
I don't know about them viewing it or not. Only you would know that.
Well, I was going to say, sorry, the LA, we had similar but slightly different. In LA, we found that it was victim statements as well as suspect demeanor was viewed. So one of the things to consider that we, in our findings in LA, because it wasn't just domestic violence, it was all crimes, and how we kind of looked at the body-worn camera evidence was to say, well, which crimes, if a cop shows up at a domestic violence and the body-worn camera's on, you get that victim statement, you may get the suspect demeanor if they're still there, which a lot of misdemeanors, they're not still there, versus other crimes like a drunk driving where it's all on camera as the cop is talking to the person. So you get a lot more of the, here's how the suspect was acting. So different types of crime cases are going to have difference, but we did find there in the IPV that it was victim because a lot of times related to victims recanting once they get to the court process, or whether they're threatened or for whatever reason, they're like, no, he didn't hurt me, that they do have that evidence on the camera of the initial when the cop responded.
And from our focus group research in San Diego too, attorneys mentioned that, often the offenders will make statements on body-worn camera, even after the fact, like it might be she deserved it or something that might incriminate them. In the case, it provides a pretty solid, piece of evidence. So.
Okay, thank you. That's all the questions that we've had from the audience. We got a couple minutes if there were any questions of each other you had. I know you all kind of know one another and work with one another, but
kind of, sort of. I think it's just going to be really interesting to see how body-worn camera, plays out over the long run. There's just too much that we don't know about it. And I do think John's question about the tsunami of body-worn camera evidence, even we see that in use of force cases, some departments might be looking at body-worn camera, spot checking it to monitor police officer behavior. But for the most part, my suspicion is they only look at it when there's been a problem reported. So problem behavior for an officer, or like for the DA, if it's a really bad, messy case. Some of the attorneys in San Diego County did mention to us that if they did look at a video, that sometimes they might identify like a witness that hadn't been interviewed by the officer, or some other evidence that wasn't in the actual written report. So that's why I do think over time, this has the ability to help improve the quality of the police report, especially on those misdemeanor offenses. Officers have more discretion about making arrests. In California, misdemeanor would be basically a push shove, no physical evidence. So the fact that we're getting issue and conviction rates going up on even those misdemeanor offenses is showing that, it's at least giving district attorneys something to work with. And they might not have to look at it to make use of it for their organization and for the victim's behalf.
okay, so I want to thank our panelists today. The last two panels on body-worn cameras have been incredibly interesting. I want to thank them for their time, their expertise, and taking a flyer on a conference that is a startup. So we appreciate the three of you being here. I also want to take some time to appreciate our attendees as well, and thank them for their time. The video from this presentation will be up online, I believe by the end of the year, but who knows what's happening in the world today. So, we'll be sending out notifications of when that happens. I have to sign off of this stream because I have another panel that another stream that I have to go jump onto to give my presentation finally after 3 days. And I am incredibly appreciative for all of you to be here, but when I leave the room, everybody's getting kicked out. So if you'd like to attend another panel on this stream, or you're presenting on another panel on this stream, please go ahead and re-click the link and rejoin. So with that, be happy and healthy, and I hope everybody has a nice holiday season and a healthy holiday season.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
All right, bye. Take care.
Bye-bye.